Welcome to the fifth and final video in the series. I just wanted to tell you before the video starts that in this video I'm working through the whole process, going back to our original task, taking the information out of the database and making those employee reports. So in terms of the quality of the explanations, the quality is a little bit lower than in previous videos, but that's because I'm focusing on the task and trying to work through it. And you should do the same. I'd really recommend going to the website, downloading the file and working along with me. But if you do need more detailed explanations, then go back to the 4 skills videos previously in this series and you'll be able to find the explanations that you need. Okay, that's enough talk. Let's get to work. Okay, let's get straight into it. So what's in the workbook at the moment? Well, we have 2 sheets, as you can see. First sheet contains a simple database with some employee information. So as you can see, 1 row for each employee. Then we have employee number, birthday details, days service and start dates. What else is in the workbook? Well, we have a sheet here which is the employee review report, and the purpose of what we're doing is to create a review report for each employee. So for each row on the database, we want to take the data in the cells and manipulate it into a review report so that we have 1 report for each employee. Now, we're not worried about this review details section at the bottom, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cells here that we're looking to populate with information from the database. So that's what we're trying to do. So what would be the first step? Well, we're going to have to duplicate sheets. We're going to have to create multiple reports because we need 1 report for each employee. So a sensible first move would be to record some code for duplicating a sheet. So that's what I'll do first. Developer tab, record macro. Name the macro. Something like duplicate sheet is going to be sensible. It will allow me to understand later what the macro does. And we can see the stop recording icon has come up. So Excel is recording in the Visual Basic Editor all the actions that we do from now on. So now we just duplicate the sheet, right click, move all copy, move to end and create a copy. And we can now stop recording. It's important to remember to stop recording so that you don't end up with reams and reams of code. So now I can open up the Visual Basic Editor and open up the modules folder, and I can see this is the code that I've recorded. I'm just going to delete the annotations that Excel has given me there. And this seems to make sense because I selected the test sheet and then copied it as the 3rd sheet in the workbook. So after sheet 2, so we can see the duplicate, the copy is the 3rd sheet in the workbook. So that's what it means. So this looks like a good start. I'm just going to trim this code down, delete the parts I don't need. So I don't need to select the test sheets because that action is captured in the next line of code. So this is the only line of code I need to duplicate the sheets. So that's a good start. I've duplicated the sheet. So what's next? Well, it would be good to be able to name the sheets by the employee number so that the name of the sheet corresponds with the employee number. So let's try to do that next. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Basic Editor and I'm going to say ActiveSheet.name. So the duplicate sheet will become the active sheet. So I can use the term ActiveSheet. ActiveSheet.name equals range B8 on the 1st sheet. Okay, we can put dot value in there as well. So this is saying create a new sheet and then make the name of the sheet equal to B8 on the 1st sheet in the workbook, and B8 of the 1st sheet in the workbook is the employee number. So what would we expect to happen? Well, hopefully we'll have a new sheet and the name of the new sheet will be what is in range B8, which is CO472, the employee number. So let's just give this a go. Okay, I'm running the code and yeah, seems to have worked well. So I have a duplicate here and the duplicate is the name of the sheet is the name of the first employee. So far so good. Seems to be working pretty well. So what other information do we need? Well, if I look at the employee reports, I need something in D7, and something in D8, D9, D10. So a good thing to do next would be to try to get that information into those cells. So I'm going to use active sheet again, but this time active sheet.range, and D7 is the first cell where I want some data to appear. And I'm going to copy and paste the code. Always copy and paste the code if you can, it will save you a lot of time. And this seems about right because I want D7 to equal the employee number, which is in cell B8 on the first sheet. So this seems to be what I want. So as always, I'm going to give it a test, not worry too much if I get an error. Give it a test and let's see what happens. Okay, so we have got an error here. So I'm going to have a look at the error, try to understand what's happened. It says the name is already taken. So that usually means that I've tried to name a sheet by a name that is already taken by a different sheet. And let's have a look, just hit debug. And let's have a look at the workbook. Yeah, that seems to make sense because I've created another duplicate here. And in the code, I've said make, let's go back to the code. In the code, I've said make the name of the sheet equal to B8 on the first sheet. B8 on the first sheet contains the employee number. As we can see, we already have a sheet with the employee number as its name. So it's not working there. So ideally what I need to do is every time I test the code, I want to delete the previous sheets. So clear out sheets that I'm not using. So now would be a good time to take a bit of a step back, record some code for deleting sheets so that I can do that at the click of a button. Obviously I can do it manually, but eventually I'm going to want 20 or 30 sheets and I don't want to have to click all those sheets to delete them. So it's a good time, step back, record some code for deleting sheets, which in the long run is going to save us time. So I'm just going to hit the stop button here, which will stop the code. And then let's think about deleting sheets. So we could record a macro to do this, but it's fairly straightforward code. So I'm just going to go straight in. So sub delete sheets, and then I'm going to take advantage of one of Excel's directories. So Excel knows how many sheets are in the workbook and has that information compiled. Now we can take advantage of that by looping through it and doing something to all of the sheets. So we can loop through that directory and then delete the sheets. You can have a look at the video on how we do that for a more detailed explanation. But I'm going to go ahead and declare a variable. I'm going to say Chris Sheets as worksheet. And then I'm going to use a for each loop to get Excel to loop through the directory of worksheets in this file. For each Chris sheet in active workbook .sheets. And this is the interesting part of the code really. This is the name of the directory, the place where Excel compiles the information about the sheets in the workbook. And that's what we're going to loop through in order to delete the sheets. So we've opened up the loop with the for, so we need to close the loop with a next Chris sheet. So now we've opened and closed the loop, but we're not actually doing anything within the loop. So if we run the code now, it would loop through the sheets, but not do anything. So we need to put something in here. Let's try chrissheet.delete. So I've used the variable name of the sheet and delete. So that will simply delete the sheet. But I don't want to delete all of the sheets because I want to keep the database, which is called dep1, and I want to keep the test sheets because that has the template for the report. So how am I going to do that? Well, I can insert a condition into the code which will, in practice, get Excel to only delete the sheet if it conforms to a certain condition. And we're going to use the index property of the sheet, chrissheet.index. Now, index is how far the sheet is positioned through the workbook. So the first sheet has an index number of 1, the second sheet has an index number of 2. So index numbers 1 and 2 we want to keep. That has we don't want to delete those sheets. So we can say if CHEATSHEET.index is more than 2, so we're saying only do this if the sheet index is 3 or more, then do that and end if. Okay, so I've opened the if statement here and closed the if statement here, and the if statement means that Excel will only delete the sheets if the index number of the sheet is more than 2, so if the sheet is the 3rd sheet in the workbook or more, the 4th or the 5th, etc. So we haven't tested this code yet. Let's give it a go, see what happens. Okay, so I'm getting the prompts asking me to confirm that I want to delete the sheet. Now that's not ideal for us, but let's just work through these and delete again, delete again. Okay, good. So where has that got us? Well, that seems to have worked well because we still have the first 2 sheets that I wanted to keep, but I don't particularly want that dialog box to come every time. That defeats the point rather of having the loop in the first place. So let's put a line of code in to disable the dialog box, and application.display alerts is a good way to do that. Equals false will disable that dialog box so it doesn't appear. And then I'm going to copy and paste that down at the bottom and turn the alerts on again. If I'm doing something else in Excel, I want to see those alerts, so it makes sense to turn them back on again. So now this code should delete the sheets, keep the first 2, and then we shouldn't have the dialog box. It disables the dialog box. So that seems to be working well, the delete sheets. So now we can go back to duplicating the sheets, and in particular to manipulating the data so that the data comes from the database into the report, into these cells. That's what we were trying to do before we started deleting sheets. So where did we get to? Well, we named the sheets. So I'm just going to put an annotation here, and then we put in the employee number. Okay. So that seems to be working pretty well. But I'm just going to run that and see what happens. Okay. Yeah, so we've got an extra sheet and the name of the sheet is right. So that seems to be working well. I'm just going to delete the sheets again. So run the delete sheets code, and now I'm down to 2 sheets. That seems to have worked well. But I don't just want the employee number. I want 4 pieces of information. Yeah. 4 pieces of information, 1 piece of information for each cell on the review reports. So how are we going to do that quickly? Well, the best way is going to be to copy and paste this line of code 4 times, and then subsequently to manipulate that code to get it to do exactly what we want to do. Where are the cells in the report? Well, the first one is D7. And then we're looking at D8, D9, and D10. So we can just manipulate these lines of code. D8, D9, D10. So we're working down these rows. And then we've got to think where on the first sheet is the information that we want to put into these cells. So we know the employee number is in B8. So we have to have a look, where is the birth year? The birth year is in column E. So I can change this reference to E, and that should work well. And I'll just put an annotation in there to remind me, birth year. And then next we're looking at, the next piece of information is the start date. So the start date is in column F. So I just go in and put in F, an annotation, start date. I think you can just about see that. Then finally, days service. And that, I'm guessing, is in column G. I'm going to go back and check column G, days service. Okay, so there we've taken a line of code, copy and paste it 4 times, then just made some tweaks to it. So saved ourselves a lot of time. So let's try this one more time. So now we're looking for the sheet to copy, for the sheet to be named, and for all of the information to be copied into the sheet into the right place. So it feels like we're making some progress with this task, but as always, we've got to test the code and see what happens. So I've just run the code, and I've got a new sheet, and I've got some information in the cells, which looks good. Let's see if the information's right. So employee 472, we're looking at a birthday of 1962. That seems to be okay. That's a good start. Let's have a look at the length of service, 10,760. 10,760, that's also accurate. So I'm satisfied that that's working well so far. So we've got to the point where it's working for a single employee. We're able to get Excel to do that at the click of a button. But we want to do more than that. We want to loop through the employees, creating a report for each employee. So how are we going to do that? You guessed it, we're going to put a loop in, which is going to require a counting variable. And I'm going to use the word counter. You could use any word, but I like to use a word. It's good practice generally to use a word that describes what the variable does. This variable is counting, and it's an integer variable because we want it to be a whole number. And then let's say first, let's just try to do 3. Equals 1, 2, 3. So I've opened the loop. That means, that's not quite right. Counter equals 1 to 3. Okay, so I've opened the loop. That means I need to close it. Next, counter. Okay, good. So we seem to be making some progress. Let's give it a test. I would expect an error to come up, but let's give it a test and let's see what happens. Okay, again, we're getting a problem with the sheet name. So let's investigate what's going on. Well, again, we have a sheet called CO472, and Excel is taking the information in cell B8 from the first sheet and trying to use that to name a sheet, which means that the name will be duplicated, which is creating the error. So how can we improve this? Well, rather than referring to the same row every time, we want Excel to move down the rows so that each time it goes through the loop, it moves one row down and takes that information onto the next report. So that involves controlling position control. If we're looking to control position, we need to use the offset command. My personal favorite command in Excel VBA, tremendously powerful, will help you get a huge amount of work done. So we're just going to stop this code and then put the offset function or commands in about here. Just going to rearrange this slightly so you can see it better. And once more. There we go. Counter -1 I think will work best. And 0 dot value. That should work. Okay. So we're saying, rather than referencing B8, we're saying offset from B8. So move away from B8 by this number of rows and this number of columns. Now, as you can see, the number of rows, I've used a counting variable there. That's really important. I've used the counter variable. That's because every time we go through the loop, the value of the counter variable is going to go up by 1. So the first time we go through the loop, the value of the counter variable is 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So actually, we're not going to move away. We're not going to offset from B8 at all because 1 minus 1 equals 0. But the second time we go through the loop, counter is going to equal 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, which means we're going to move one row down. So we're going to offset one row down from cell B8. So that will achieve the effect we're looking for. We're looking to move one row down. Offset is helping us to do that. So again, we've made a small improvement. So let's test it and see what happens. Just going to play the code. Okay, we've got an error message there. That's because, well, I didn't clear out the sheets before I ran the code. So I'm going to go back to the delete sheet code and delete the sheets so that we're back to our 2 original sheets. I'm just going to check that that's the case. Okay, back to our 2 sheets, good. And let's test the duplicate sheet code again. Okay, we seem to have a problem there. Okay, again, it's to do with naming the sheets. That's because I haven't put the offset command in here. So I'm just going to copy the offset code that I put in and then tidy it up a bit. Okay, So that means when Excel is naming the sheets, it should be working down the database. So the first sheet will have 472 and the second sheet should have 695 as a name. That's what we would expect to happen. Okay, so play the code again. Okay, not quite there yet. Okay, I think that's because I didn't clear out the sheets again. Yeah, so I'm just going to delete the sheets. Let's try it one more time. Okay, no error messages this time. Good. As we can see, we've got 3 different sheet names here. So 470, 695, 472. So 472, 695, 470. We've managed to reverse the order, but I don't think that's a major issue at this stage. We may come back to that at the end, but I can accept that at the moment. I just want to get the loop working. So it seems to be working well. 3 different sheet names, and we can see the employee number has also come through. So 470, 695, 472. So those parts are working well, but we can see the remaining data is not quite there yet. That is duplicated on the 3 sheets. So why is that? Well, we can see we put the offset command into the first 2 lines of code, the first 2 lines of the code that's manipulating the data, but we haven't yet put the offset command into the remaining 3 lines of code. So those last 3 cell values, they're being duplicated across the 3 sheets. So what are we going to do? Well, as always, if we can copy and paste, then let's do that. I'm just going to copy and paste the offset parts and then replace the word value on each line. And that means that for each column on the database, Excel will work down the column. Every time we go through the loop, the value of counts will increase by 1, so that offset will also increase by 1, which will have the effect of working down through the database. Every time we go around the loop, Excel will go 1 row further down, hopefully. Okay, let's clear out the sheets again. You can see how important it was to create the delete sheet code. That's already saved me a lot of time, so that was worth it. Let's hit the code again. Hopefully we're getting close now. So what have we got? Okay, so 470, birth year 1979, and 4881. I'm just going to check that. 470, birth year 1979, 4881. That seems to be accurate. Let's check 695, 1988, 31st of August 2011, 695, 1988, 31st of August 2011. Okay, that seems to be working well. So I'm happy that that's accurate. However, we're not quite there yet because we've only put programmed the code to work for 3 employees so far, but we actually want it to work for, there's about 20 employees in the database, but ideally the code would be dynamic, and that means that if we were to add additional employees to the bottom of the database, the code would still work. The code would create additional reports for those employees too. So how would we go about doing that? Well, one way would be to introduce a formula here to count how many employees are in the database. And the count A formula would be a good way to do that. I'm going to let's count column C because there's a lot of extra data in column B that we don't really need. Okay, so that's given me 24. I'm just going to select the database now, and I can see there's 23 employees in the database, so the formula is not quite right. That's because the formula is also counting this cell here, which is the column header. We don't want it to count that because that's not an employee detail, so we just adjust the formula by putting a -1 in, and we can see that there's now 23 employees in the database, which is accurate because we just counted them. If I put another employee in, then we will see that this value, which was 23, is now 24. I'm just going to put another one in, and we would expect it to go up to 25. Just to test this. Okay, it's now up to 25. So that seems to be working well. I'm just going to clear out the additional data I put in there, so I don't really need it. So that's good. So we now have a mechanism to recognize how many employees are in the database. How is that going to help us? Well, it's going to help us with loop control in Visual Basic telling Excel how many times to go through the loop, because we want Excel to go through the loop once for each employee. So where we control how often Excel, how many times Excel goes through the loop is just here. So rather than saying 3, we're going to make a reference to the worksheet formula that we created, which is on the first sheet and range F5. F5 dot value. So that means that the loop will go through as many times as is equal to cell F5 on the first sheet. Cell F5 on the first sheet. So cell F5 on the first sheet is 23. So that means that as it is, Excel will go through the loop 23 times, which is the same as the number of employees in the database. So it's giving us the correct number of loops. So once again, let's clear out the sheets that we don't need. Again, we're back down to 2 sheets, and then let's just run the code. Let's see what happens. Okay, it's taking a bit longer now because it's working through the whole database. Previously, we were just creating 3 reports. Now we're creating 23. It's going to create a bit longer. It's going to take a bit longer, but we can see that it's now finished. And we can see we've got lots of sheets down here as well. So we will have 23 sheets if I were to click through all of them. But we just want to validate this and see if the code has worked, see if it's accurate. So employee 601, we would expect this to be the last employee in the database, 1981, and then 25th of March 2004. So let's have a look in the database. Employee 601, and 25th of March 2004, and 1981 was the birth year. So that seems to have worked pretty well. So let's choose someone else. Employee 589, 1962, and 9673. Employee 589, there we go, 1962 and 9673. Okay, so we seem to have succeeded in creating a report for each employee. So I'm happy that this code is working pretty well and that this code is accurate. So that concludes this series of videos, Excel VBA for Post Beginners. I hope in this video you were able to download the file from the website and to follow along and to actually work through the task yourself. That's what we've done in this series. We've taken an everyday task that would take a lot of time and a lot of kind of mental energy, kind of get you a little bit stressed, taken that task, broken it down into the key skills, and then at the end, in the final video, combine those key skills together into an application and work through the whole process. So I hope you're able to do that yourself, and maybe through this series of videos you've begun to feel the power of loops and of code generally. And as I said in the video series, if you really practice, you get good at these techniques, it's not just going to save you time in Excel, it's going to actually transform the way you're thinking about Excel, transform the way you're thinking about data intensive tasks generally. Hopefully give you a lot more confidence, allow you to save a lot of time in your work. So I hope the series has been useful for you. As I said at the beginning, the inspiration for this series was from a task that I had to do, and I've just explained how I did it using VBA. So I'd really like to hear what you're working on, what you're trying to use VBA for, and if it looks like a good material and there's lots to learn, then I may make a video series about it. So do leave a comment, get in touch with me, let me know how you're getting on. See you soon.